Chapter 1. The Hook. There is a moment, maybe you've felt it, right after you've done something kind for someone. Not the moment they thank you. The moment just before that. The moment when you've helped, and you haven't yet received anything back. That feeling, quiet, warm, almost private, has a name. Scientists call it the helper's high. And for the last 40 years, researchers across Harvard, Emory, and the National Institutes of Health have been studying it, measuring it, scanning the brains of people who experience it. What they found challenges almost everything we instinctively believe about human nature. We assume that getting is better than giving. We assume that self-interest is our most powerful driver. We assume that generosity is something we have to override our instincts to perform. Every one of those assumptions is wrong. And understanding why, really understanding it, might be the most practically useful thing you learn this week. Welcome to Depth Mind, exploring the deeper layers of human nature. Chapter 2. The Science Begins. The story begins in 1988. A researcher named Alan Lukes was conducting a large-scale survey, thousands of volunteers across the United States. He was asking them one deceptively simple question: how do you feel after you help someone? The responses were remarkably consistent. Over and over, volunteers reported a sudden, distinct physical sensation immediately after helping another person. A warmth in the chest, a sense of energy, a lightening of mood that lasted not just for moments, but for hours, sometimes days afterward. Lukes called it the helper's high, borrowing the language of exercise physiology, because what respondents described sounded remarkably similar to a runner's high. But at the time, it was just anecdote, just self-report. No one could look inside the brain and see what was actually happening. But all of that changed in the year 2006. At the National Institutes of Health, neuroscientist Jorge Moll and his team put volunteers inside fMRI scanners, machines that track blood flow in the brain in real time. They asked participants to imagine donating money to charity, then to imagine keeping the money for themselves. When the participants imagined donating, even just imagining it, a specific network of regions in the brain lit up. The nucleus accumbens, the caudate nucleus, the anterior cingulate. These are not obscure corners of the brain. These are the regions that activate when you eat food you love, when you experience physical touch, when you receive unexpected good news. These are the reward circuits. The act of giving was activating the same neural pathways as receiving pleasure. Not a weak signal, not a minor effect, a robust, consistent, replicable finding. The brain was, quite literally, rewarding generosity. Chapter 3. It gets even stranger. Here's where the research gets genuinely surprising. Because you might think, fine, giving feels good. Reward circuits activate. That makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. Maybe we're wired to cooperate. But the researchers wanted to know, does it actually matter whether the giving makes a difference? Does the generosity need to be effective to produce the feeling? The answer, in multiple studies, is no. The warm glow of giving appears to be tied more to the act of intention than to the measurable outcome. People who volunteer for causes where their individual impact is small, helping at a food bank, planting trees in a park, report just as strong a helper's high as people in roles with direct, visible impact. In a landmark 2008 study by Elizabeth Dunn at the University of British Columbia, participants were given money, either $5 or $20. Half were told to spend it on themselves. Half were told to spend it on someone else. At the end of the day, participants were asked to rate their happiness. The amount of money didn't matter. What mattered, the only variable that predicted happiness, was how they spent it. Those who gave reported significantly higher well-being than those who kept. Dunn has since replicated this finding across cultures, income levels, and age groups. She found it in Canada, South Africa, India, and Uganda. Different cultures, different economic contexts, the same result. Generosity appears to be a human universal. Not a cultural artifact, not a luxury of the affluent. A feature built in.
Retention anchor. I want to pause here and ask you something personal. Think of the last time you genuinely helped someone. Not because you had to, not for recognition, just because you wanted to. How did it feel afterward? Most people, when they really sit with that memory, notice something they've never quite named. A particular quality of feeling. Not the same as joy exactly, not the same as satisfaction, something quieter than both. That feeling is real. It is neurologically real. And, as we're about to see, it has effects on your body and your long-term health that researchers are only just beginning to fully understand. Chapter 4. The Health Effects. In the 1990s, a researcher at the University of Michigan named James House and his colleagues published a study that stopped the medical community in its tracks. They had tracked 2,700 people in Tecumseh, Michigan over nearly a decade. They monitored their health, their social behavior, and their lifestyle choices. And then they looked at who lived longer. The most significant predictor of early death in the study was not smoking, not obesity, not a sedentary lifestyle. Though all of these mattered, the single strongest predictor of early death was social isolation combined with the absence of meaningful giving. People who regularly helped others, volunteering, caregiving, active community involvement, had dramatically lower mortality rates, even after controlling for age, health, and socioeconomic status. The researchers weren't entirely sure why, but subsequent studies have offered some compelling clues. Giving appears to reduce cortisol, the stress hormone. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state. It reduces inflammatory markers that, when chronically elevated, contribute to heart disease, diabetes, and cognitive decline. In 2013, a study published in the American Journal of Public Health followed volunteers over a 4-year period. Volunteers who reported giving out of genuine compassion, rather than obligation or guilt, had a 44% lower likelihood of dying during the study period. 44%. That is not a small effect. That is the kind of number that belongs in clinical trials for new medications. And yet, and this is important, the effect was specifically tied to freely chosen, intrinsically motivated giving, helping out of genuine care, not helping because you feel you have to, not helping because you're afraid of what happens if you don't. The research consistently finds that obligatory giving, the kind that comes from guilt or social pressure, does not produce the same neurological or health effects. Generosity, it seems, has to come from the right place, and when it does, it pays back in ways that nothing else quite replicates. Chapter 5. The Ripple Effect. So far, we've been talking about what giving does to the giver. But there's another dimension to this research, one that, when I first encountered it, made me sit quietly for a long time. Kindness is contagious, not metaphorically, empirically. In a series of studies by James Fowler and Nicholas Christakis, published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, researchers set up economic games where strangers interacted with each other. When one person behaved generously, it triggered generosity in others, but not just immediate others. The effect spread outward, 3 degrees of separation. The people who witnessed generosity became more generous with people they'd never met, and those people, in turn, influenced others. One act of genuine generosity, traceable, measurable, documented, could influence the behavior of dozens of people who were never present for the original act. The researchers estimated that each person who witnessed an act of generosity passed on additional generosity to roughly 3 more people, who each passed it on to 3 more. The math is staggering when you follow it out. But the human reality is even more striking. Every time you choose generosity, every time you help someone because you genuinely want to, you are not just affecting yourself and not just affecting them. You are changing the social fabric of a community you may never fully see. Chapter 5.1. The Retention Anchor. I want to return to something I said at the beginning. We assume that self-interest is our most powerful driver. That generosity requires overriding our instincts. The science says something different. It says that our instincts are generous, that the nervous system is literally designed to reward giving, that what we call selfish impulses are often conditioned responses, fear, scarcity, learned helplessness, layered over a deeper architecture that runs in the other direction. Carl Jung talked about the importance of finding the self beneath the persona, the authentic nature that lies under our constructed social identity. What if part of what Jung was pointing toward, the core of what we are, is fundamentally generous? That's not a romantic idea. That's what the neuroscience is suggesting. Chapter 6. 3 Types of Giving. Here is where this becomes genuinely practical, because the research doesn't just say give more, it's more specific than that. It identifies 3 distinct patterns of giving, and they produce very different outcomes. The first is obligatory giving. This is helping because you feel you have no choice. Social pressure, fear of judgment, guilt, the feeling that you should. This type of giving does not produce the helper's high, it often produces resentment. And the research shows it has neutral to negative effects on well-being over time. The second is strategic giving. This is giving because you expect something in return. Networking, social capital, reputation management. Interestingly, this also does not fully produce the neurological reward. The brain seems to distinguish between authentic generosity and calculated exchange. The reward circuits activate most powerfully when the giving is genuinely unconditional. The third is intrinsic giving. This is giving because something in you, spontaneously, freely, wants to, not from fear, not from calculation. from a genuine impulse toward the other person's well-being. This is the one. This is where the helper's high lives, where the health effects emerge, where the ripple effect begins. The question, the genuinely interesting psychological question, is how do you cultivate more of this in your own life? Because it's not simply a matter of giving more, it's a matter of giving differently. Chapter 7. 3 Things to Do. The research across all these studies converges on a few clear, practical principles. First, small is sufficient. You do not need grand gestures. The neurological reward is almost identical whether you help someone carry their groceries or fund a major charity. Dr. Keltner at UC Berkeley found that brief, spontaneous acts of kindness, a genuine compliment, a held door, a moment of real listening, activate the same neural circuits as larger acts as long as they're freely chosen. Start small. Start now. The biology doesn't care about scale. Second, give to be present, not to be thanked. The research consistently shows that the helper's high is strongest before the recipient responds. In that quiet moment between the giving and the acknowledgement, this suggests the reward is not social. It's not about approval. It's internal. When you give, try to notice that moment before any response and stay in it. That is where the neuroscience lives. Third, give where you feel genuine connection, not where you feel guilty, not where you feel pressured, where you feel drawn. The research shows that giving aligned with your own values and interests produces the strongest well-being effects. A scientist who mentors young researchers, a musician who teaches free lessons, a parent who reads to children at the local school. The intersection of what you love and what helps others, that is where intrinsic giving is most natural and most powerful. Chapter 8. Closing. I want to end where we started. That quiet, warm feeling right after you've helped someone, before they've said anything. Now you know what it is. It's your nucleus accumbens, your anterior cingulate, your nervous system shifting from stress to rest. It's 40 years of research in a single felt moment, but it's also something harder to name, something that the neuroscience points toward but can't fully contain. Maybe it's what it feels like to be, briefly, most fully yourself. Not the self that's afraid, not the self that's performing. The self that, without thinking, extends outward. Jung believed that the journey to the self was the central project of human life. That beneath every layer of conditioning and persona, there was something authentic waiting. I think this research is part of a map to that place. If this video meant something to you, share it with someone. Not because I asked you to, but because that is, as it turns out, its own kind of helping. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper. Next week, we're exploring Carl Jung's concept of the self, the psychology of becoming fully who you are. I'll see you there. Subscribe to the channel, The Depth Mind.